my addiction came before every marriage. I've been married and divorced a handful of times because no relationship was more important than my relationship with substances because that was my higher power. That was my whole world. My addiction became my parent. My addiction stepped in and said, I'm not going to leave you like they did. Just stick with me and we're going to be together forever. And a very weird part of me thought that I had to carry out my parents' legacy. They died from using drugs. And so I have to continue the legacy of the family and use drugs until I die as well. And that's what happened. I died.
Welcome to the Light the Day podcast, where we explore spiritually transformative experiences. I'm your host, Julie Clough, and I am joined today by Betty Guadagno. And I said it correctly, I'm hoping. Hi, Betty.
Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for this space. So grateful for you.
I am so glad you're here. I am just absolutely enthralled by your story. And I know when others hear it today, they're going to be enthralled as well. What a beautiful transformation that you've experienced. First, just very briefly, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing now, and then we'll go back in time.
Okay. Yeah. So my name's Betty. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I work as a transformation coach, an addiction recovery coach. I also host a podcast for the International Association for Near-Death Studies. The acronym is IANS, and I work very closely in that community. And yeah, that's what my life is. I had a near-death experience in 2019 from a drug overdose. So before my experience, my life was full of debauchery and trauma and poverty and all the things that go along with that. And then I had this white light moment and it blasted me out of my militant atheism that I had had for my entire experience.
Wow. So take us back to before 2019. That's the year that you mentioned, right? That you had this experience. Take us back to what life looked like. You gave us a little snapshot, but what did that look like for you?
Yeah, life was very dark, full of suffering, full of sadness. And I didn't realize that there was anything but that because I had witnessed that in my family for generations and generations going back. Always suffering, always lack, always addiction, sexual trauma, emotional, physical trauma. It was just a very chaotic, dysfunctional home, just a really dysfunctional life. But I thought that it was all super normal. I thought that it was normal for your parents to steal your groceries. I thought that it was normal to move more than once a year because we were always getting evicted. My parents could never hold down jobs. And I watched my parents struggle with their addiction for all of my aware life. I'm sure they were using drugs when I was really little, but when I started getting around the age of 8 or 9, it became really apparent to me that my parents were doing something to alter their state of mind. And I just wanted to do the same thing. Not because I really looked up to them or anything, but because I had already underwent a lot of sexual and emotional trauma in my life. And I just wanted to not feel that. And so I saw that if they took something, they stopped feeling the way that they felt. And so as soon as I could get my hands on what it was that they were taking, I started doing the exact same thing. And yeah, my life was really racked in addiction. My parents both died from their addiction. They actually committed suicide with one another when I was 23. This was in 2007, so it was the height of the Oxycontin epidemic. And my parents just they didn't know a way out. They didn't know that there was a way to just stop using because they had never seen anybody in our family do that. And so they thought that in order to stop using drugs, they had to do what everybody else did, and that's die from their addiction. And I was so young. I have a younger sister. She was only 18 when that happened, and that death just completely transformed our lives. I decided that I was no longer going to be a victim in that moment because I felt so victimized. So then I decided that I would be a perpetrator because I didn't even know that there was anything other than
Wow.
abuser and abusee. I didn't realize that there was a whole nother universe that I could have went into, which is the one that I currently reside in, where I'm a healer now. And, they have a saying that hurt people hurt people. And so that's what my life was like. I went around causing tons and tons of damage to other people. I just wanted everybody to hurt as badly as I hurt.
There's not a lot of cliche statements that really embrace the truth of something, but that's one cliche statement, hurt people, that is universally true, I believe. It really is true. And it's interesting that you recognize now that, like, this was your world. This is what you knew. You didn't know anything different. And so for you, the transformation when when your parents died was to become the perpetrator instead of being the victim. That's so fascinating. So what did your life spiral into then when you made a almost conscious decision to be a perpetrator?
Oh yeah, it was definitely conscious, but yeah, and thank you for all the words that you just said. And the other half of that cliche that is very rooted in truth is that healed people heal people. And
Uh,
I've found that to be the case 1,000% as well. But after this experience of consciously deciding that I would be a perpetrator, that I would maliciously and intentionally abuse other people, my world completely, yeah, it was like a dumpster fire. I don't know how else to describe it. I was a hot mess. My life with my addiction came before everything. I abandoned my sister. I moved across the country. I said, I can't handle this. I can't do this. I just wanted to be as medicated and sedated as I possibly could. My addiction came before every marriage. I've been married and divorced a handful of times because no relationship was more important than my relationship with substances, because that was my higher power. That was my whole world. My addiction became my parent. My addiction stepped in and said, I'm not going to leave you like they did. Just stick with me and we're going to be together forever. And a very weird part of me thought that I had to carry out my parents' legacy. They died from using drugs. And so I have to continue the legacy of the family and use drugs until I die as well. And that's what happened. I died. I took too many drugs. Go figure. Who would have ever thought? I would have thought, definitely. Not intentionally, on accident, but every time that I used, I was using with the knowledge that if I die, it's no big deal. So it was like this soft suicide every day. It was like a soft suicide. And I had this overdose, and yeah, oh my goodness, my whole head cracked open. That's what it felt like. My spirit left my body, and that's when I had my near-death experience.
I want to go back for just a second and just talk about what you said a second ago, and that was that you felt like you had to carry out the legacy of your parents' experience. That's such a fascinating way of looking at it. I'm just kind of curious about, was there ever a moment during that time before your near death experience where you thought, maybe I'm on the wrong route, or maybe there's a different way, or maybe there's a better way? Was there ever a moment, some cracks in that facade, or that experience that you were having?
Yeah, I had little cracks of moments, but they weren't anything big enough to carry me into the unknown. I needed some big, huge push of a catalyst to actually just throw me over the edge of the cliff. So a couple of times in my life, I had tried recovery. One of the instances was my second husband had left me. We were both strung out on drugs. I had got him strung out on opiates. And after several years of living life in a totally depraved way, he said, I can't do this anymore and I need to get clean. And I said, well, I'm not going to do that because I've only known you for, 4 years. I've known my addiction my whole life and I'm not letting go of my addiction. And that when he actually left, I was suicidal. I couldn't believe it. And I just thought, okay, let me just get clean because then maybe I can get him back.
Mm,
And so I tried, and there's a saying in recovery that you can't do it for anybody else. If you do,
right.
it won't work. And that's what happened. I think I stayed clean for about 100 days, and I was inpatient. I was in and out of different rehabs and long-term facilities. So once I came back out into the regular world, I was like, I couldn't hack it. I couldn't handle it. Another time was I had a boyfriend who had passed away, and he had kidney disease. He needed a kidney transplant, but that's not what he died from. He actually died because we were using drugs, and I thought that we should be living our best life. And to me, living your best life meant using drugs. I didn't know about any other kind of life. And so he ended up doing too much of a substance and his heart exploded. I wasn't with him when it happened, but I felt so responsible because I had introduced him to this whole world of using and sedating and medicating. And after his death, I was like, I made a deal with myself that I was going to do an insane amount of drugs, and that if I didn't die, I would go get help. And I woke up and I checked myself into a detox and a rehab, and I started going to 12-step meetings. But again, it was all so unfamiliar. I felt so unworthy. I didn't feel worthy of a good life. And so I didn't last. I didn't last more than a month. And it wasn't until this near death experience that was my catalyst into recovery eventually.
Yeah. You know, I just want to pause for a moment and express some compassion for that Betty that was enwrapped in drugs and drug culture and this experience of not knowing any different, and just that experience of not knowing what to do with the pain, and feeling like the only option was sedation and medication and drugs and so forth. So just express a lot of compassion for where you were in that moment, and anyone else who is suffering from any kind of addiction. That there's just, when people are hurting, they look for ways out. And when they don't know that there's other options, like your former self wasn't aware, when they're unaware, a lot of times that's the direction that people go, just like that young Betty that was hurting. So I just want to share that compassion with you before we talk about what happened in your near death experience. So if you want to go into what happened in that experience, that
Yeah.
would be
And
great.
thank you for that. And yeah, for anybody who has any kind of addictive personality or is dealing with addiction, there really is hope. And I hope that you find that out of the rest of my story. You don't have to die to have recovery. I did, but you don't because I came back.
Exactly. And that's why your story is so beautiful and so enlightening and so helpful, is because, like you said, healed people heal people. And we don't necessarily have to go through the same things as other people in order to be enlightened by their story, in order to be changed by the experience of their story. So thank you for sharing it with us.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into the juicy stuff. Okay.
Okay, let's
So
do
I
it.
have so I ended up overdosing in my bathroom in my house, and I hit all of the kind of regular markers of a near death experience. The first part of my experience was a life review. And like I had shared, I had traumatized a lot of people. And so it was very painful experiencing my life review because I felt the pain that I had inflicted from the other person's point of view. And then I started to experience things that never happened to me in this lifetime. Maybe they happened to me in other lifetimes, or maybe they were just collective earth experiences that I was feeling, but I was feeling the joy of childbirth. And that's not an experience that I've had in my lifetime. I was feeling the pain of having your child die. And I
Mm,
was like being downloaded with all the women in my life who had lost their children, my boyfriend's mother included. And it was, I mean, I don't have any words. I have no words. I just know that people who have that life experience are our greatest spiritual soldiers. They take on an immense amount of pain that I don't have the appropriate vocabulary to conceptualize. Then I started to experience my parents' suicide, but not only from my experience finding them, but from their experience of being in that state of mind.
Wow.
And again, I still don't have great words for it, but it felt like I was drowning in an ocean of anguish. Like I couldn't breathe. I was being suffocated by spikes, and it felt like my skin was being pulled apart, and it was just so horrendous. And so I understand why they did what they did. They wanted that amount of pain to end because it was so uncomfortable. And then I thought to myself, okay, well, I see my parents, so I'm dead because I'm seeing them and I know that they're dead. So then I thought, okay, great, I'm dead. And this is what death is. Now I'm just stuck here in this unbearable pain. And then I started to hear these masculine voices, one of which was my boyfriend who had recently passed away. The other was my father. And then my divine masculine energy presented itself. And they were all chanting together and they were saying, "You are worthy of all the love in the universe. You are worthy of all the love in the universe." And it was like this marching beat that I just began to follow. And then I found myself landed in the light. And in my experience, everything looked a lot like a video game. And that could be because of the generation that I'm born in, or because we're living in a simulation, or maybe a combination of both. And was in this huge, it felt like a spaceship. It felt like the Gravitron ride at carnivals. It's like, it looks like a big spaceship that spins really fast. And there was a commander in the center of the ship. And you can call that commander Christ or Krishna, Buddha, it doesn't matter what you call it, just something higher and something loving. And this commander was talking to thousands of our light bodies on this ship and saying that we were getting ready to jump to Earth for the most exciting time to be here, that we were coming to Earth for the Great Awakening, the liberation of consciousness, transformation of thought. I don't know if Earth actually wants liberation, but this was the download. This was the scene. And keep in mind, militant atheist, never heard about the Great Awakening, never heard of a chakra, never heard of a near death experience, total unawareness. And I'm having this experience.
Wow.
Then my vision shifts over, or my awareness shifts over to another scene. And I'm in front of a table of beings. And it just looked like a long, crappy, kind of like banquet hall table. It was nothing fancy or anything. And they were thumbing through this gigantic book. And they're looking at me and they're like looking at the book. Okay, I see. You're just here for information. You're not meant to stay. Don't get comfortable. And I'm looking around me and I'm like, you guys are not talking to me, right? Because I'm staying. I don't know where I am or what the heck is going on, but there's no way that I'm leaving because this is amazing. Where I just came from, not amazing. This, amazing. And they just kept affirming, thumbing through the book. No, 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 just information. That's all that you're here for. And then my awareness shifts to a gigantic grocery store, and there's a man and he's leading me through this store with a big empty grocery cart. And he says, okay, let's pick your life. And lining the walls of the grocery store aisles were these gigantic cereal boxes. And every cereal box had a life experience on it. And I knew that I was coming to Earth for the Great Awakening. And I also somehow had this innate knowing that I had to transmute things from previous incarnations. And so I start grabbing everything. I'm like, okay, we got a lot of work to do. Here we go. And I just start grabbing every box. And I mean, the craziest, densest human experiences: poverty, addiction, homelessness, prostitution, degradation, all sorts of trauma. And the one that really sticks out that I feel is very important to talk about is that when I picked the cereal box of childhood sexual trauma, a little orb of light came out with the box. And that orb of light was the soul of the man who would molest me as a small child. And we came orb to orb with each other and we came into contract. And I saw all the reasons why, that in a previous life, I had been his abuser in the same capacity. And in this life, I was not only healing this trauma for myself, but for the entire collective, because right now we are in the midst of this great transformation. So as I heal my trauma, I heal for every little girl who didn't get an opportunity to heal from theirs before they left form. And so it was like this great sense of pride that came over me and this amazing unshackling of my victim mentality. Okay, so now things have no longer happened to me. They actually happened for me because I am part of this co creation of designing it this way. And so now I don't have to feel like God's out to get me, or I have the worst luck, or whatever the narratives were that I had been telling myself about why bad things continually kept happening to me. I even picked cereal boxes with other souls where I would be the abuser in their lives. We came into a contract with each other. So I find myself back in front of the table of beings, and I'm like, wow, this is really amazing information. I'm so grateful for it. I'm basically on my knees crying in gratitude. And I'm like, I'm still not going to go back to Earth, but I'm so happy to know all of this. Thank you guys so much for telling me. But I'm just going to go to my room and go grab my PJs, and I'll watch the show from up here because there's definitely no way that I'm going back. And they said, this is not a punishment. You're not going back as a punishment. You're going back because you signed up for something, and we're not going to let you miss your opportunity to experience it. And they shared with me that I've been on earth for the whole of existence, and that I say the same things every time I come back because we're in that state of amnesia where I'm always like, Earth is a dumpster fire. That place is disgusting. Please don't make me go back there. It's ghetto. Ew, I don't want to go back. And they just kept affirming to me that my life was not going to be the same when I came back from this experience. And I just kept screaming, and no, I will not go back. You cannot make me go back. I don't care what you say. I'm not going back. And they said, if you don't go back into the body that you just came from, you're going to be immediately reborn into a new body. And then they showed me the baby that I would be born into. And she was going to take my life experience cart and make it her own. And then because of the family that she was being born into, she had other things that were automatically going in the cart. And I thought, okay, if my only options are truly starting from zero or going back into that glitched, broken body that I just came from that's lying on a dirty bathroom floor, then I guess I'm going to go back into the body that I just came from because there's no way that I can start from zero. It's impossible.
Mm.
And then I started to feel my awareness sift back into my body, and the beings of light said, the first part of your life was boot camp, and the second part of your life will be carrying out the mission. It's not going to be nearly as challenging. You're going to have mentors and teachers and communities and soulmates and kindred spirits, and it's going to be amazing. Just trust us. And I was like, I do not trust you guys, nor will I ever trust you guys. And that was it. And I woke up in my bathroom, and I just thought the whole thing was drug-induced psychosis. I thought, whoa, I was tripping so hard that I thought that I died and I was talking to God, and that's crazy. And I just kept living my life the way that I was. I didn't think anything of it. I just completely brushed it off as just some psychosis.
Wow. Well, what shifted where you recognized that that was more than just the drugs talking? When did that awareness come to
So it
be?
took me a couple of months. Just there was a lot of synchronicities. There were a lot of signs that were getting blasted in my face over and over again. And it was like the universe was making my path very, very narrow, that I couldn't keep going on the direction that I was going. Like if there was roadblocks, the GPS was like, make a U-turn, make a U-turn, make a U-turn. You can't turn here. And all of my drug dealers decided to stop selling drugs. I'm talking about like 10 separate men on the same day, all made a decision. They didn't know each other. They all made a decision to stop. So now I had nothing, and I had no way to get what I needed. And I had a physical dependency to heroin.
Mm.
And one of the main reasons why I stayed on drugs for so long was because I did not want to experience withdrawal. And I had experienced withdrawal many times in my life. But in this instance, I was going through a very extreme withdrawal. I was on day 3. And that's the day, it's the worst day. You're sick all over yourself. Your skin feels like it's made of fire and broken glass, and your blood feels like lava inside of you. And it's just so insanely painful. And the worst part is that there's nothing physically wrong with you. your brain is just so mixed up from the drugs that it's making you think that you're in pain. And I had this moment of mental and spiritual suicide where I said out loud, man, I couldn't even kill myself if I wanted to right now because I'm so sick that I can't even get up out of bed to figure out a way to kill myself. And
Mhm.
then I heard a voice and it told me that I could request what I wanted fixed. And I was in the throes of desperation. So I was like, okay, strange voice, please. I'm in so much pain. Help me. And they told me to lay back and count backwards from 10. And then, as I did, in my mind's eye, these two little men appeared. And they had these bulbous noses and they were wearing these white lab coats. And then these little lawnmowers manifested in front of them. And they started to walk through the crevices of my mind. And as they did, I felt these intense hot tingles every step that they took. And then as they were done mapping my mind, my whole head was filled with tingles. And then there was this bright white flash, and I was instantaneously healed out of day 3 of heroin withdrawal. I mean, like moments before, I was sick all over myself, welcoming death. And there I was, completely well and healed and fine. And I threw myself on the ground and I'm crying out to the divine, how could this be happening? I don't believe in this. I don't believe in you. You could not have picked a more unworthy subject to bestow this kind of grace on. And just for the contrast, I was an atheist, an orphan to suicide. I was a meth head prostitute strung out on heroin. I was a liar, a manipulator, a thief. I was a racist. I was a rapist. I was a pimp. I was everything that you would think would condemn you to the exact opposite of what I was experiencing. And I thought to myself, like, this is it. Like, okay, God's real. I understand now. And I was like, and I am God. And so then I went out on the New York City subway system and I started evangelizing and proselytizing, saying that I was the second coming of Christ and that I could heal people with just my hands. And I kept going up to random homeless drug addicts and like just laying my hands on them. And it was crazy. It was crazy. And it
Wow.
took me a while to make that dust settle and to come into the awareness that I had been saved or given the grace to not fully withdraw from the symptoms of heroin withdrawal because I was meant to go into recovery. And
Mhm.
that was my biggest obstacle, was being physically addicted to one drug. I still had millions of mental addictions to other substances and just the habit of every day doing these things to get drugs and not realizing that there's other things that I can do.
Wow. So yeah, that's really interesting. It's like, it's not just the miraculous experiences you've had, but it's then the integration, right?
Yes.
So that beginning part looked messy too. It was like going around telling everybody I can heal you, and I love the humor that you bring to this really, really painful story and experience. And I just want to put a billboard up for everybody. You are worthy of all the love in the universe. You are worthy of all the love in the universe. And I hope everyone is hearing that and feeling it, because it's not just for you, Betty, it's for everybody. We are all worthy of all the love in the universe. And I'm just wondering, when is your book coming out? Do you have a book?
Yeah, I am writing. I'm in the process of writing. I actually just came back from a writing retreat with another near-death experiencer. She was teaching the retreat. And so I'm really excited for the book writing process. And it's going to be like half memoir, going into much more detail of my life than just what we're going to share, in this small amount of time, but
Yeah.
also about the tools. How do you heal? Like, do you have to die to have healing? No, you absolutely do not have to die to have healing. And, even for me with the catalyst of the spiritual experience, I had to do tons, I still do on a daily basis, tons and tons of work for integration, recovery, reprogramming, and to live my life in a spiritually led way.
Yeah, beautiful. And I found, it's interesting as you shared that. picking the cereal boxes. That was the representation of you choosing your experiences here. What I have found is that those of us who have chosen a life of great growth, we experience great change, great challenges. It's the growth, the challenges, it's part of that growth decision. And you obviously chose a lifetime of great growth personally, but also a lifetime of transformation for not only yourself, but for others as you share your story and do the work that you do now. So let's, I so I wanted to ask you, when you were going through those withdrawals, I'm assuming you were on your own. It's not like you were in a rehab somewhere receiving help or anything to work through that you were totally on your own. And it's so beautiful that you had that miraculous experience, because it piggybacked on the near death experience that you had and showed you that, no, like, this is real, this is miraculous, this is real. And I know that you're a student of the Course in Miracles. And so I kind of want to get into a little bit of like where you went from there. How did you start to integrate these great changes? Because I know you now. I didn't know you then. And you're a beautiful, wonderful, loving human being that is truly here to bring healing.
So thank you for that. Thanks for the compliment. So yeah, one of the experiences that led me into the pathway of recovery, obviously the healing, huge catalyst, but still, even then, it took me weeks. All I knew was that I needed to learn. I knew that I needed to learn. And so the only thing I knew about God really was the Bible. And so I went to Walgreens and I stole a Bible. And I'm like, I probably could have just went to church and they would have given me one. But, I was like living in my addict mentality. So I went and stole a Bible. And I just kept opening it up to random pages, and it was like it was speaking to me. And one of the things that I opened it up to was, I'm not going to try to quote it exactly, but something around like the birds don't want for anything. Like, you don't have to worry about food or shelter or anything like that, because the birds don't worry about that stuff. And I kind of knew that I was probably going to have to go into long-term treatment, even though I really didn't want to. The way the story sounds is like, oh, this is all so beautiful. And then she just shifted into recovery. But there was so much resistance. I was so fearful of change, not because my life was good, because it absolutely wasn't, but it was familiar. That's all that I knew. I had never seen anybody recover before. So I was so fearful what that was going to look like. But through some more miraculous signs and synchronicities, I found myself in the rooms of 12-step fellowship. And I walked into this women's meeting, and at this time in my life, I didn't look the way that I look now. I was super skinny. My skin was gray and sunken in. I had these huge holes all over my face and my arms because every time that I got high, I thought that bugs were crawling inside of me. And so I would cut myself open with razor blades and burn myself with lighters and torches trying to get the bugs out of me.
Wow.
And I was missing most of my teeth. I'm happy that I was able to afford some teeth in my life today. But I looked messed up, is what I'm saying. And I know that I have a dis-ease of addiction, because nobody would consciously decide to use drugs when that's the outcome, that like all your teeth fall out of your head and you think that bugs live inside of you. Like, there's something uncontrollable about my addiction. And I walked into this women's meeting, and this woman saw me and she could tell that I was new because I looked destroyed. And we hug in my 12-step fellowship. And so she came up to me and she held me so tight. And I hadn't been touched by somebody in a loving way in a really long time. And she whispered in my ear and she said, "You are worthy of all the love in the universe. You are worthy of all the love in the universe." And I melted into her and I cried and I rested my head on her big boobies for as long as she would let me. And I knew it. I knew that this is what I had to do, that I was in the right place and that I was divinely guided. And I found myself in a long-term rehab, and it was brutal. I had decades of emotions waiting to greet me when I went into treatment, and I had to process the grief from the loss of my parents, which I had never processed in a clean and sober way. that I had to process the grief from my boyfriend. I had to process the grief from my last life. I was never going to be her again. She died. And I just kept telling everybody, I'm dead, I'm dead. And they just didn't understand what I was saying, but it really felt like I was dead and that I had woken up in a new reality where I was going to have an opportunity to become the best version of myself. And that was all so scary. And so I didn't have a cell phone or a computer for a year and a half because that's how long I stayed in treatment. And it wasn't like some nice spa resort. It was like a super ghetto, Medicaid funded, in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, rehab, all women, which is brutal because everybody's traumatized, myself included, and we're
Yeah.
all acting out of our wounds and our trauma. It's like 25 little girls who don't want to be friends with each other, all shoved in a small house, and they have to learn how to live together. And it was a lot, but I learned so much about myself and other people and human nature and trauma and addiction. And so I didn't have access to the internet, so I couldn't really Google what happened to me. And nobody there was able to help me figure out what was going on. I just kept affirming that I was dead. And people were like, please, Betty, shut up. We get it. You think that you're dead. Okay. So they would let us go to the library once a week. And there was like this small little section on spirituality and religion. And that's where I beelined it for every time we were able to go to the library. And one day there was this book and it was halfway off the shelf. And I swear to God, it was sparkling. And so I ran over to it and it was A Course in Miracles Made Easy by Alan Cohen.
Mm.
And I devoured that book. I didn't sleep. I read it all in one sitting. And I felt like, okay, this is the key. I have to get my hands on this Course in Miracles book. And I asked the librarian, can you help me get this book? And she said, there's no way to rent that book from the library. And so I just kept renting books about the book from the library. I probably read over a dozen books about the book from the library. Gabrielle Bernstein, Marianne Williamson, Karen Casey, all of these great Course in Miracles teachers. And one day when I was coming back to the facility, they do like a bag check when you get back there to make sure that you don't have contraband. And the clinical director was checking my bag and she saw that I had all these Course in Miracles books. And she said, oh, you know what? I actually have a copy of the course. I got it 30 years ago. It's been sitting on my bookshelf ever since. I tried to read it. I wasn't into it. Do you want to borrow it? And she knew that I was there for a long time, like, because it was a 9 to 12 month program. So I was going to be there for at least a year. And I was like, oh my God, I would love nothing more than to borrow this book from you. I'll take such good care of it. Please. Thank you. And that was my beginning of my process into A Course in Miracles. And that book absolutely changed the course of my life.
Wow. You know what I find, just there's so much meat and loveliness and beauty in your story and your transformation. I know it was immensely painful, and there's no way for us to fully comprehend how painful and just ground shaking all of that was for you, all those changes and everything. But I actually find it quite interesting and beautiful that you found the teachers of the course before you found the course. I feel like that was an introduction that was gentle and loving for you to have that introduction to the course before you got into the meat of the course, because it can be quite dense to interact with. What
Oh
are
yeah,
your thoughts?
yes, yes, yes. Even the concept of the book, and if anybody is listening doesn't know what A Course in Miracles is, it's a metaphysical text and it's channeled by Jesus. So Jesus is the author of this book, and it's channeled through the mind of a militant atheist psychotherapist from Columbia University in the 1970s. So I don't know a lot about Jesus at this point in my life, and I'm like, okay, this is a crazy concept that Jesus wrote a book in the 1970s. That's weird. But A Course in Miracles is very challenging to read. It really is. Even as I was reading it, I thought, okay, this is a handbook for the recently deceased, just like in the movie Beetlejuice, right? Because like you need a caseworker to help you understand. It reads like stereo instructions. these words don't belong next to each other. How are all of these paragraphs? And it took me, I just kept reading, even though sometimes I didn't understand what I was reading. And I just kept going. And there's a workbook inside of it, and you're supposed to do a lesson a day, every day of the year. And I just thought, if I can get through the lessons and I can get through the text, then I'll get to go back to heaven. Because my whole goal after my experience was get the F off of earth. Don't be here. Don't be here. And I really, really thought that if I believed that hard enough that I would actually leave my body. And I kept crying out to God, and I'm like, look at, I've done, I haven't used drugs in 3 months. Like, that's never happened in my whole life. I am doing really good. Are you guys ready to come and get me? And I'd get no response. And then I'm like, okay, I found A Course in Miracles. Like, this is it, right? Like, when are you guys coming to get me? And still no response. And so when I made it to the last paragraph of that book, I took my shoes off. I laid back in my bunk bed. Yes, I lived in a bunk bed for a year and a half. And I thought to myself, this is it. I'm going to shoot out of my body. I did it. I cracked the code. And nothing happened as I got to the last word. Just like nothing, like dead silence, stale air. But I had a lot more information. And through the rest of my integration process, I came more into the level of acceptance that it's not about going back to heaven. It's about bringing heaven here. And so every day I have an opportunity to consciously create heaven on earth. And A Course in Miracles really does help me do that. And just being kind to myself, to other people. And I'm not perfect. There's plenty of times throughout the day when I'm cursing at other people in New York City who are not walking quickly enough, or who are in my way, or the Amazon driver didn't get to my house fast enough, or whatever it is. But every day I start my day and I end my day in a state of spirituality. What happens in the middle, I'm not really responsible for. But as long as I can cap the days with those things, I'm doing much better than I was. I'm not trying to be better than anybody else. I'm just trying to be better than I used to be.
Yeah. I heard you tell a story, and I'm not sure where this comes in your integration, a story of going to a dealership and saying, I meant to buy this. Would you tell that story? Because I think it's so interesting and so delightful the way you tell that story.
So after the healing, and I thought that I was Jesus. My life was just crazy. I mean, everything was so crazy, but I had this very strong knowing that I was supposed to teach people about God. And so the download was, you need to get an RV, you need to travel across the country and talk about higher consciousness. And I had the imagery of Steve Martin and Deborah Winger in Leap of Faith, like that was going to be my life. And so I went to a RV dealership and I was like, hello, I am here for an RV. And they were like, great, all we need is your license and your credit card, and we'll get you on a test drive. And I was like, oh no, I don't have those things. And they were like, excuse me? And I was like, God sent me. I don't need a license to drive an RV. Like, this is a God moment. And they were like, miss, you obviously need those things. And then something came up about my debit card, and I was like, well, there's negative $400 on there right now. So will that be okay? And they were like, okay, this woman's obviously insane. But that was where my head was. I just thought that things were magically going to happen for me, and things have magically happened for me. But with time, because we live in this third dimensional space where it takes time for miracles to come to us sometimes, if we have that belief, which I do in many instances. But
Yes.
yeah, man, that was the craziest. I mean, I was just out there, way out there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love that the healing that you've had, the experiences that you've had, the work that you do now as the host of the IONS, which is, again, I think you mentioned at the top of the show, the International Association for Near-Death Studies, which I love. IONS, it has been a life changer for me too. And all the work that you do in your coaching and your addiction recovery programs and so forth, it's just a beautiful example of what can be and the miracles that do exist in life, despite the tremendous challenges that we have. Um, I'm just wondering, where you sit today, what are some of the things that you have found most helpful? And one of the things you mentioned was starting your day and ending your day with a spiritual practice. Can you share a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, it's nothing fancy. Like, I do not sit on a pillow for 20 minutes. I live in New York City. We're very fast paced. I don't have time for that. So I love kind of compounding different practices together. So the first thing I do as soon as I open my eyes, I go straight into a state of gratitude. I used to be homeless and I have a beautiful home today. And this was manifested by the universe for me. I don't doubt it for a second. So every time I open my eyes and I see that I'm in a comfortable bed and in this apartment, I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much. And then in that moment of gratitude, I can go into a manifestation portal and I can start to design my day. Today, I want to be of service to someone. Today, someone's going to ask me to come on a podcast. Today, I'm going to get 30 minutes of writing done. I'm going to be able to help somebody today. And as long as I can center my day around gratitude and service, pretty much anything that I desire will come to fruition. It might not look exactly the way that I want it to. I also have a ritual where I drink a liter of water as soon as I wake up, not because I like water, because I just want to get it over with. Yuck. But I also speak affirmation into the water because water holds memory. So there's a certain thing that I do where I let go of my defects of character. Some of my defects of character are judgment, control, defensiveness, and I say, I surrender these. And then I speak into the water the spiritual principles to counteract those character defects. So I say, today I am full of acceptance and compassion and tolerance and patience. And then I gulp down all this water and I feel like every cell in my body is now just completely contained with those spiritual principles. So those are some of my rituals that I do on a daily basis. And then again, like I might walk out the door and stub my toe, and then I'm cursing God and everything that is. And I forget all about my beautiful water ritual or the fact that I'm so happy to have a home. But at least I tried, and that's really all that matters.
Yeah, beautiful. It is so important that, and I loved the way that you framed that. You bookcase your day with these spiritual practices, and it's similar to what I share with people. We don't need to be in this spiritual state all day long, every day. 5-10 minutes a day can make a huge difference. If you're doing nothing now, 5-10 minutes a day will make a huge difference. If you're doing something now, maybe just refining what you're doing, but just being in the habit of doing something. It's like salting our food. Without the salt, there's no taste. And the spiritual practice is not the main emphasis of our life. It's like, not that we're sitting on the pillow, like you said, 24/7 waiting for the light to come down and greet us. It's more that we're salting our day with these spiritual practices, reminding ourselves who we really are, that we really are deserving of all the love in the universe. um, as we're ending, Betty, is there anything else that you would like to share before we go?
Well, I feel called to share this after what you just shared. We came to Earth to be human. Be human. Celebrate your humanness. If we wanted to be these spiritually enlightened beings, we would have just stayed in heaven. But guess what? Heaven is boring as fuck. Okay. Why would we come here? It's like gotta be super boring. Like it's only one thing all the time. Nah, snooze. We come here, we want to experience this wide range of emotion, everything from grief and shame and acceptance and courage and serenity. We have this amazing opportunity to climb up and down this scale of consciousness here. So I am in a practice of celebrating my humanness today. At first, I thought I was supposed to be some kind of enlightened spiritual being, but today I accept the fact that I am a human and I would even come back to Earth. I know lots of experiencers say, like, no, I'm never coming back here. I'm really enjoying the human experience today. So if you're a person who's in a space of perceived suffering, or you're really dealing with some serious challenges in life that you're not sure how to get through, please connect with me. My handle on everything is Buddha Betty. It's a play on words. I'm not actually a Buddha, but I'd love to connect. Even if I can't work with you individually, I have tons of resources for free communities where you can go and plant yourself and find the healing tools that you need. So please feel free to reach out.
I love that. And that was my next question is how do people reach you? I know you're on Instagram. Where else can they find you?
YouTube, TikTok.
Awesome. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Betty. I have loved this conversation, as I know everybody has. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Julie.